Here is working section 3, assess vulnerabilities modeling and assessment. So this section 3, introduction to the working section 3. Here's working section 3 is asset vulnerabilities modeling and assessment. The working section of disaster risk assessment training program 3. In this, we link with modern one is introduction to evidence-based disaster risk assessment, and it's modern two is the national disaster risk assessment, and modern three is provincial disaster risk management. PDRA, modern four is disaster risk assessment, and at facilities. So evidence-based disaster risk assessment methodological framework, technical standard of norm is vulnerabilities profile, assess vulnerabilities model. This toolkit, NDRA toolkit is a comparative and hazard mapping. We have done already assess geospatial data modeling and processing. Assess exposure mapping and profiling. Next toolkit we will introduce about the assess vulnerabilities modeling and profiling. The data information product is map template, hazard atlas, map template, and risk profile atlas, and here's support to the national exposure database and national vulnerabilities database. So introduction to working section 3 is objectives analyze the sensitivities of target population group and assess to measure hazard prevail in Mongolia, review the proposed vulnerabilities modeling for the target population group, review the design prototype national vulnerabilities database, and identify the additional data source of the data and information asset vulnerabilities. Expect output, we will have knows how to customize concept vulnerabilities models of different target asset considering the available vulnerabilities, related data information countries, and how to use national vulnerabilities database and retrieve vulnerabilities profile from asset category and just reduction. Agenda is introduction to working group. Section 3 is conceptual vulnerability model and key target element, proposed vulnerabilities model, indicator system to NDRA. Section 3.3 is a prototype the national vulnerability database with demos, process and template the national vulnerabilities hotspot mapping. Section 3.1 is conceptual vulnerabilities model of key elements. What is vulnerabilities? Is referred to condition. Risk assessment is to avoid exposure target element to hazard, reduce vulnerabilities of target elements, minimize intensity and occurrence of hazard. In many cases, controlling the occurrence of hazards event is beyond our capacity. So we have a triangle, exposure, vulnerabilities, risk and hazard. Risk and risk is here, is hazard happen. Risk triangle according to Granger 2002. So vulnerability is equal condition, equal degree, equal threat, equal exposure, equal attribute, characteristic, vulnerability, ability of capability of anticipate, cope with, resist, recover from impact of the natural hazard. So miss of the concept of vulnerabilities, fragility damage function or curve like this is showing the intensity and mean damage. Concept of vulnerability model. Social group is a level of poverty or income vulnerabilities, resistant dwelling, weak structure, frail or physic limit individual, inadequate belief, custom and attitudes of response to the risk or disaster, lack of limit access of critical services such as communication, transport, power supply, water supply, sanitation, lack of limit access to resources such as information, knowledge, and technologies, lack of limit access. Concept of vulnerabilities model of building vulnerabilities structure such as building bridges, road. It can be like this: building vulnerabilities, orientation, foundation, structure, materials, maintenance, and protection. Conceptual vulnerability model for critical facilities construction. Critical facilities vulnerabilities is a construction occupancy protection, exposure, site risk management, coping capacity, and concept of vulnerability model for land resource is ecological security, land resource stress development, pressure management challenges. Vulnerabilities metric is a very high, moderate, low, and very low. That's 5 classes, vulnerabilities classes. So we divide to the section 3.2 proposed vulnerabilities model and indicator for national disaster risk assessment in Mongolia. Here's a proposed vulnerability model and index system for national disaster risk assessment is back multi-hazard exposure index, back multi-hazard exposure index, building multi-hazard exposure index, facilities multi-hazard exposure index, network infrastructure multi-hazard exposure index. Yeah, we have pop group vulnerability index, we have household vulnerability index, we have back demographic vulnerability index, we have back housing vulnerabilities index, and we have building type vulnerabilities index, we have network infrastructures vulnerability index, and back to be the back composite vulnerabilities index, back CVI, household CVIs, pop group composition vulnerability index, PG CVI, building CVI, facilities app CVI, infrastructure ICVI. So here's a land multi-hazard exposure index plus with the land degradation degree to be the land composite vulnerabilities index, livestock plus with the back husbandry vulnerability index, or back livestock to be the livestock composite vulnerability index. So back CBI, the composite vulnerability index equal back multi-hazard exposure index plus with the back vulnerability index and back household index, back demographic, back demographic, back household composite vulnerability index, household CVI, back household CVI composite vulnerability index equals back multi-hazard exposure index plus with household vulnerabilities index. We have this matrix. Household vulnerabilities assessment is easy back the population vulnerability assessment literature building foundation, building part of vulnerabilities assessment, building part of hotspot, building part of vulnerabilities analysis out the world, building part of vulnerabilities analysis, facilities composite vulnerability index equals multi-hazard exposure index with building the physical vulnerability index. You have infrastructure composite. Here's a road composite index and livestock crop composite vulnerability index. Section 3.3 prototypes is a NVDB National Vulnerability Database. Key characteristic of a target element quân TT analyze vulnerability index. Here is example that Timo back building critical land livestock, and therefore is a 5-step vulnerabilities mapping process. Calculate CVI target elements, calculate a categorized building element, loading vulnerability profile using a map template, and here's a process step 1, step 2, step 3 process. Step 4 is loading vulnerabilities profile from Excel database into GIS. And next, he's using the map template to prepare vulnerabilities hotspot map and profile. And road vulnerabilities integrate the CVI class information from Excel file to road layer using the road set name, the field, and linking together. And is we can calculate the information and linking together. Map unique is back. Demographic DVI composite by back, national back by, here is by SOM, here is by SOM CVI, CVI by SOM for low and very low, yeah, high and very high CVI, and is for medium by the IMAC, number vulnerabilities back, and CVI by region for low and very low CVI, and road vulnerabilities hotspot map. We have this. Thank you very much.